In this tutorial, we're going to go over the basics of how to set up toggles and modular characters. It's recommended that you have watched the extending avatars tutorial previously, as this will go through some of the same components. So once you've got your avatar set up, so once you have your own character blueprints set up, we're going to want to make our own child actor blueprint so that we can do our own coding on a character. So let's just go create a new blueprint class here. Just base it off of actor. BB modular. Now in our character blueprints, we are going to want to add this blueprint we've created as a child actor class. So open up your character here. Now under our body component here, we're going to want to add a new component, call it child actor. And I'll just call this modular actor. And the child actor class we're going to want to set on the right here is the blueprint we just created. Compile and save that. Now again, since we've modified this main character blueprint, we need to drag and drop this back into our avatar setup to populate the changes. Just like that. Now we can open up our blueprint class. So for the sake of this, say we want to have a part of our body that we can toggle on and off visibly and change the skeletal mesh of it. So what we're going to want to do first is add a skeletal mesh component here. Let's call this body. Now I'm just using a example pack here for modular characters. So you can use your own or find off the marketplace as well. So for this, I'm just going to grab this spacesuit chest here and assign it as the skeletal mesh. So assign that to the skeletal mesh within our own custom blueprint here. Now in order to get this mesh to follow the primary pose of our character, like moving with it, we need to go into the event graph here, just go to those, and on begin play we want to get a parent character. This will grab a pointer back to our main blueprint here, and we can get the character mesh, top on here. Now we want to grab a pointer to our body here and drag off its pin, and so set master pose component. And the new master pose component will be our primary character mesh. Now you can do this as many times as you want with other components here too. So I could add one for hands. Drag it out here and plug it into the same. So now these two are going to have their master pose driven by our primary character here. So this is the general idea of how you would set up a modular character with different components you can pick and swap. So you add your own custom blueprint here and add additional skeletal mesh components for the different components you wanted to add to your character. Now what I'm going to do, just for the sake of optimization purposes, is disable the component tick on each of these because we don't need it for this. So that option is available in the when you select each of the components. Under the component tick, just untick start with tick enabled. Now I'm also going to add in some meshes here for the hands and the legs. Now if we can test this in the editor, see if it works, just go and click in play mode. There you go. Got the modular character. Now let's say we want to toggle the visibility of a certain section. Say we want to hide or unhide the chest. Now what we're going to want to do is make a replication component here. So add component regh actor, and then want to generate a unique ID for it. Now the simplest way to do anything with toggle is to use a simple Boolean variable. So let's create a new variable here on the left side. Let's call it is hidden. Now we're going to want to get and set this variable for toggling our visibility, and you can toggle the visibility of any component just by getting it here and go set hidden. I'm just going to create a new function here to toggle visibility. So we'll grab the mesh that we want to toggle here. So we're going to want to call this, and we want to hide and unhide the object now. So for this example, I'm just going to create a simple widget, which is going to have a button in it for hiding and unhiding our mesh. So we create a new class here, the user interface and widget, toggle widget. Open that, and let's add a button in. Let's put that anywhere for the moment. And let's add a event to its onClicked or onReleased event. On this button released event, we're going to want to notify our main blueprint that we have clicked the button and we want to change the visibility now. So for this, I'm going to use a event dispatcher called onClicked. Now whenever we click this button, we want to call this event dispatcher. And in our main blueprint, on the begin play, let's say it's enable input, or enable player input. This will enable keyboard or controller inputs into this actor on our local end only. So once it's done, we want to create a widget. And that class is going to be our toggle widget. We can keep this as a variable for the moment. Now we can use a keyboard button for this for showing and hiding the widget. So I'm just going to use I on the keyboard. Now we're also going to want a Boolean just to know when our widget is on screen or not. So we can copy our current one, say is UI visible. Get it here, and branch on pressed. So if our eye is visible, I want to remove from parent. That will remove it from our screen. And if it's not visible, we want to add it to our player viewport. Add to violet player viewport function. Compile and save. And we're going to want to set our is UI visible after these as well. So when we remove it, we want to set it to false. When we add it, we want to set it to true. Display, press I, screen. Yep. Now in order to get our mouse on screen for this, we're going to want to get our player controller. And set input mode. And let's focus our widget here. And we're also going to want to show our mouse cursor. So set show mouse to true. can copy this up here, and with the hide a mouse, we want to set our input mode to game only. Now we're going to press our I key. We're going to add the widget to our viewport, set our input mode, and show the mouse cursor on screen. And if it's already visible, remove the widget and hide our mouse cursor. And see, now we have our mouse cursor on screen. We can click the button, press I, and it goes away. Now we're going to want to listen for that button click that we set up earlier with the event dispatcher. So we can get our widget here, and we can just assign on clicked. So this will be called through this event dispatcher here whenever we click the button. Now we can get our isHidden variable here. And a simple way to do the opposite of what it currently is just to use a not. So just not. This will give you the opposite of whatever the current value is. And now we can set it from that. Whenever we click our button, this will just flip-flop back between true and false. And we can call our toggle visibility from that. And we can hide and unhide that. Now, if we want to replicate this event here so that other people can see us hiding and unhiding our object, what we're going to use now is the new property replication system. So the easiest method for doing that is to take advantage of the rep notify functions. So if we click on our variable here that we want to replicate, under its replication setting, drop down, go to rep notify. Now this new function that's created on the left here, it's a function that gets called after this variable here has been updated. But for anyone else, they will get this network event happen here. And then we can trigger our events through this code. So we can simply grab toggle visibility and then get our isHidden event there. Plugged it in. Now it's important you don't modify this variable within this rep notify function, because you're essentially just going to make an infinite loop. If you try and set something within something that's going to get called whenever it changes. And now to notify the network of this property change, all we're going to need to do is again get our isHidden variable here, and we want to get our replication component as well. And we will now get the new function called replicate event, or replicate property. Plug our replication component in there, and our property will go into this gray pin here. Now the reason this is gray is because it's what's called a wildcard. So it can be pretty much any variable type you're wanting, except for an object. It won't work with like something like this. But you could use a, so let's create a vector. Drop a vector in there as well. Now we can replicate changes to our vector components or vector variables. But now I'm just going to replicate this boolean here. And that's all you need to do for that. Now this will also keep track of the property changes. So if someone loads in later on, they will then get the updated variables. So if you've used that rep notify event here to change the mesh or the visibility of this object or whatever you're doing, then this will get called on their end when they load it and get the update. So they will then catch up to your version of what's happening. Now we can test this in a multiplayer situation here by changing our number of players to 2 and play as listen server. So on my other client here, I will then see, now we can hide and unhide this mesh. So I'm clicking this button on my other client, which is also being called locally and cross network. So that's essentially how you can make a toggle just through a keyboard import and a little bit of UI. Now you could also make a VR UI for this as well. If you add in a widget component here into your components list. And in here we could add in the widget that we want to use. So I will just show you quickly. Open up our thing here. Now I will scale this widget down to a more reasonable size for what we need it to be. Check our button here. Just slap that in there. And I will put the widget into the widget class inside the widget component. Now you're going to notice it's going to be really big. So you can scale down the draw size for it as well as the component scale. Now I can attach this to my hand. Like that. And we'll just throw it on a wrist here. If your laser is not hitting the UI I've created, you just want to check the collision presets you've got here. Having as UI should be fine. So now if we were in VR, we could test this on our character. Now we could press that button with our menu laser. Now it's very large on screen though. We can still toggle. For widgets like these, that are 3D widgets in the world, to get the click events from these ones, what you're going to need to do is grab the widget here and go get user widget object, and then we're going to want to cast to our widget class that we made. So this one will be, so cast to toggle widget, and from that we can do the same thing here. We can assign an event to onClicked and do the exact same thing. So that's how you can basically toggle something on and off, or change variables, and update the states for others to see as well. If you want to be able to change the mesh that's in your modular body here, you can use the set skeletal mesh function. So if we grab a body here, go set skeletal mesh, and this new mesh here will be the asset reference. So if I find a new one, go suit one, it'll be one of these. And you can do the exact same thing with toggling it here. But let's say we have a list of items we want to scroll through and change our body mesh around. So what we can do is we can make an array here. So change our array type to skeletal mesh. Yeah, great spell. And just be the straight skeletal mesh object reference. Make an array. all the body meshes, compile, and let's add a few variations in here, defaults. So add that one, and that one. Now when we want to change our mesh here from an array, we just type in get, and this index here will be whichever one of these that we're picking from. So this, keep in mind, this is a 0 based index, meaning the number of items in this is 3, but the item numbering themselves is this number here, 0, 1, and 2. So it starts at 0. So if we want to create a integer variable here that we're going to use to pick which mesh we want to use, one integer, say, I don't know, mesh index. And we're also going to have this as a rep notify. Change it to single variable, not array. And now we can use that to drive the changing of the mesh. Let's collapse that, call it set new mesh. Now in our onRep mesh index function, we can paste this new function here. So again, whenever this onRep mesh index gets changed across the network, that will then set this new mesh on the person it's happening for, and they will get the specific index from the array, which will be one of our bodies here. Now it's important that when you change this mesh index here that you don't go beyond the number of elements that are actually in the array, or just throw an error. Now in our little UI here, when we want to change the body mesh that we're using, I'll just get rid of this. So this can be our hide unhide button here. Just make a copy. I'll just add some text into this one. So call this one. So what I did there was I just added my buttons into a horizontal box. And the UI here is horizontal box. And I just set their size here to fill so that they will then span the width of the horizontal box. And I will just change their text here to 1, 2, and 3. So when we click button 1, let's add another event dispatcher in here, call it pick mesh. Now we can also add variables into our event dispatchers in the inputs, like a new parameter, index, integer, or name, drag it out, call. So when we click button 1 here, we want to call our event dispatcher with the new index, but remembering that arrays are 0 based, so 1 will actually be 0. We want to call this with index 0. Same with 2. Now we'll call this one using index 1. And with 3, with index 2. Now we're back in our modular character blueprint here, we can assign another event here to onPicked mesh. Get some room. So just as a safety check, you can do is valid index, the new index that we're getting, just so we don't go out of range. And now we can set our mesh index to the new value. And now we can call our setNewMesh function locally. And we can also call it for the network with our mesh index variable. Now we can test that. So 1, 2, and 3. And we can test it for multiplayer as well. So on my client, I can now switch around between the different meshes on the character. And same on my primary one. And on my client, I can see we're in this nice suit. And that is the basics of swapping around meshes on modular characters. Again, we can use an array of items that we have here, or array of skeletal meshes for our character. Pick the index from it, set the new index, get the actual mesh with the index they're wanting, set skeletal mesh, and then call the replicate property so that other people will then see it happen. And once that property is replicated, it'll call the onRep mesh index, which will then call the setNewMesh on their end. And for toggling things, we can use a simple boolean, flip-flop its value back and forth, toggle visibility locally, and then call the update across the network so that others see it happen as well. And we can just use our simple little UI here from our keyboard. Also, if you want to link this input action here to a motion controller input, there is a few available. You can typically just look in the project settings under inputs, and it has a whole bunch of inputs here. So you got triggers, menu buttons. You can see which button they relate to on the controller. So you can listen for any of these events as well, just by that name in our blueprint here. So go menu left, and now we have an action that will be called from keyboard and motion controller as well. Important thing with this though is once you click on this event here, top right you've got a consume input and override parent binding. You typically just want to disable both of those, and also it will also override whatever action is on those on the main game code. So if you put this, so if you're using this menu left as well on your character on desktop, if you press tab and you had this consume input or override input here, your menu wouldn't open because this is the new function that's actually overriding that button click. Same with a motion controller. Now that should be all you need to go ahead and make your own modular characters and toggleables.